Hello, today we're talking about 5 bands that had a great 90s album run, and basically what I mean by that is bands where all of their 90s albums were all great, and I'm not talking about decent or just okay or just good, I'm talking great. But yeah, I did have a rule for this video, and that rule is it has to be at least 3 albums or more when it comes to number of albums that came out in the 90s from bands. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive into this. We're going to go ahead and start off with 311. Of course, starting off with their debut album, Music, which I still think is a pretty good album. I mean, some of my favorites on here, Welcome. I also like Freak Out. I mean, you definitely get some great chemistry between S.A. and Nick. You can definitely notice that in songs like My Stony Baby and Freak Out and Do You Right and Paradise. But yeah, some of my other favorites, Paradise, Do You Right. Plain, I think, is kind of an underrated deep cut on the album, but yeah, pretty enjoyable album, and I'd say a pretty good debut album. But they would come out with Grassroots in '94, and this album to me is one of the band's best. I mean, name some of my favorites on here. We got Homebrew. I really like the bass work in Nut Symptom. You move towards some of the more melodic songs on here. I really enjoy 8:16 a.m. and 123, which I think is one of the band's best album closers. I really like that song. Offbeat Bare Ass, I think, is maybe one of the best deep cuts on here. I'd probably say the same for probably Tate. I really like Tate. I mean, it's a shorter track on the album, but I personally dig it. And along with S.A.'s vocals in that song. But yeah, all around, another great album from 311. And now we're moving to an album that's often considered one of their best or their best, and that album is, of course, the Blue Album, or the self-titled. I mean, you have some of their biggest songs on here, like All Mixed Up and Down, especially Down, which is definitely one of the band's best album openers. But you also get some really good deep cuts on here, like Misdirected Hostility and Sweet, which is probably one of my favorites on here. Same with Jack-O-Lantern's Weather. But yeah, all around, another really great album from 311, and yeah, probably a top 3 311 album for me. And then we'll be moving to my favorite 311 album, Transistor. Definitely a pretty unique album in their discography. It doesn't really sound like anything that came before it or after it, again, in their discography. I mean, a bit more experimental. You get more, maybe you could say, you get more atmosphere this time around. And yeah, definitely a pretty intriguing listen. I mean, of course, S.A. and Nick further showing that they still continue to have great chemistry, such as in songs like Prisoner, for example. But yeah, Prisoner probably being one of my favorite singles from the band. I really like that song a lot. But if I were to name some of my favorites on here, Transistor, of course, the title track, Prisoner, Use of Time, I really dig the solo work in that song. The Continuous Life, I think, is probably one of my favorite deep cuts. Same with Rub-a-Dub and Strangers. But yeah, really good album for me, one of the band's best. And personally, I put it at the top. Really cool, really good stuff. And then their final album in the 90s, you got Sound System. Another great album, I'd say. You have Come Original on here, which is one of the bigger songs on here. But kind of like with the other albums and their when it comes to their 90s work, you also get some pretty good deep cuts on here too, like Living and Rockin' and Strong All Along. Flowing, I really dig the guitar work in that song especially, and rhythmically I dig it too. But yeah, all around, another great album for 311, and it also has one of my favorite album openers from them, Freeze Time, which, if I remember correctly, when I saw 311 live, I believe they opened up with Freeze Time, so I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, 311, let's go ahead and move on to the next band, and that band is Alice in Chains. Starting off, we got Facelift, which is actually my favorite Alice in Chains album. I know a lot of people point to Dirt, but Dirt would be in close second, of course, but Facelift has to be at the top for me. I absolutely love this album. Definitely one of my favorites when it comes to grunge in general, and also I'd say the same thing for Dirt. But yeah, some of my favorites on here, We Die Young, and of course one of the big fan favorites, and also one of their biggest songs, Man in the Box, is another one of my favorites on here. You move towards the second half where you get some of the more lesser known songs, but in the second half, you do get some of my favorite songs on the album too, like Sunshine and I Know Something About You. Rhythmically, I like what they're doing in that song. Same with the album closer, Real Thing. You also have Love, Hate, Love, which to me has probably one of Lane's best vocal performances maybe ever. Again, I really dig his vocals in that song. Definitely a fairly haunting song and definitely one of the highlights on the album. Put You Down is another fairly catchy song. Rhythmically, I like what they're doing in that song too. But yeah, all around, really great album. And also probably one of the best debut albums of the 90s, I'd maybe say. I mean, again, Facelift, definitely great. Then you also have the classic Dirt album, which is definitely one of the fan favorites and often considered their best or one of their best. And for good reason, too. Yeah, do have some of their biggest songs in here, like Down in a Hole, Rooster, Them Bones, Wood. But you do have my favorite Alice in Chains song on here, though, Wood. I mean, that song probably has one of my favorite vocal performances from Lane in general. I mean, Wood, I'd say maybe a perfect song. I mean, Rooster is also really good. You move towards some of the lesser known songs. I really dig Rain When I Die. That's probably one of my favorites on the album. Same with the title track, Dirt. You also have Angry Chair. I like the guitar work in that song especially, but all around, another great album from Alice in Chains. And then we move to the final album with Lane. You got the self-titled, or Tripod, or the Dog album. I mean, of course, this album definitely has many titles, but yeah, often considered the weakest of the three Lane albums, but still, I think it's actually still pretty good. I'd still say great. I mean, some of my favorites on here, Heaven Beside You, Grind, which I think is definitely one of the band's best album openers. Some of the lesser known songs or less popular songs in here I think are also really good, like Nothing Song, which is maybe, I don't know, maybe a top 15 Alice in Chains song for me. I really like that song and easily one of my favorites when it comes to the second half of the album. You also have Again, which I think is one of the band's best singles. Sludge Factory, I think, is hands down one of their most underrated songs and also one of my personal favorites. I really dig the guitar work, especially from Jerry in that song. But yeah, all around, another great album from Alice in Chains. But yeah, definitely a pretty impressive 90s run from Alice in Chains. But let's go ahead and move on to the next band. And to me, a band that I think is pretty underrated, and to me, honestly, it should have been bigger. And there isn't really any bands that really sound like them, too. I mean, but yeah, this band, the band we will be talking about is Corrosion of Conformity, starting off with their album Blind, which is maybe my favorite album from them. I mean, it's also their only album with Carl on vocals, but of course you do have some vocals from Pepper on here, such as in the song Vote with the Bullet, which I think is one of the band's best songs. The guitar work is also really great. You also notice that they have a really great rhythm section, especially when you hear songs like Vote with the Bullet and Damn for All Time and Dance of the Dead. I also really like Buried. That's probably one of my favorite songs from Corrosion of Conformity. Painted Smiling Face is another song that I think really shows that they have a great rhythm section, especially with their drummer Reed Mullins. But yeah, all around, love this album, and for me, definitely one of the band's best. And I do like Carl's vocals. It would have been cool to see them do more with him, but of course, the definitive COC frontman really is Pepper, and yeah, they would stick with him. Of course, with Deliverance, or starting off with Deliverance, but of course he would leave later on, but then come back with No Cross, No Crown. But anyways, back with Deliverance. This would be maybe their most commercially successful album. I mean, of course, you have their biggest songs on here, Albatross and Clean My Wounds, which are definitely great singles for them and also great songs in general. But you do have other really great songs in here, like Heaven's Not Overflowing, which I think is one of the band's best album openers. 7 Days might have some of my favorites, at least some of my favorite grooves on the album, guitar wise. And Deliverance, I think, is a fairly catchy song and probably one of my favorites when it comes to the second half. And then Migraine is a song that's grown to be another one of my favorites on here. But yeah, definitely a really great album from Corrosion of Conformity. And then we're moving to Wise Blood, which definitely has some of the band's heaviest work, I'd say. But you also have some of one of their biggest singles on here, Drowning in a Daydream, which is definitely a great song. That's probably one of my favorite songs from them in general. But This album definitely has some of their best songs, I'd say, especially Long Whip, Big America, which I think is kind of an underrated song for them, but probably one of my favorite COC songs, honestly. Wishbone's also really good. Rhythmically, I like what they're doing in that song. You have the song Fuel, which is maybe one of their fastest songs, and I really like that song a lot, actually. Maybe one of my favorites on the album. And if I remember correctly, if I'm thinking of the right song, Man or Ash is the song that features James Hetfield. I could be wrong about that, but either way, that's another one of my favorites on the album. But yeah, all around, definitely another great album for Corrosion of Conformity. And if you're not familiar with Corrosion of Conformity, definitely check them out. Definitely a really great band. Really good stuff. But let's go ahead and move on to the next band, and also one of my favorite bands of all time. That band being Faith No More, starting off with one of my favorite albums of all time, Angel Dust. Definitely a perfect album in my opinion, and definitely one of those albums I'd say you can listen to from front to back just fine. I mean, of course you do have some of the heavier cuts on here that I think are really good, like Jizz Lobber and Malpractice, but I also think the singles on here still hold up, like Midlife Crisis and Everything's Ruined, and A Small Victory, which I think is one of the band's best singles. But you dive towards the deep cuts in the album, and some of my favorite deep cuts, I mean, Kindergarten has to be one of them. Same with Crack Hitler. Vocally, I like what Mike is doing in that song. But yeah, absolutely love this album, and probably one of my favorite albums of the 90s in general, to be honest. Again, love this album, really good stuff. But moving to the next album, we have King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime, which, if I remember correctly, you get the guitarist from Mr. Bungle on this album. Trey, if I got the name right, because of course Angel Dust would be their final album with Jim. But yeah, I mean, I think Trey does a solid job on this album, and I do like Mr. Bungle. But King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime, honestly, this album and The Real Thing kind of fight for being my second favorite Faith No More album. I do really think this album is that strong. But yeah, something you notice with this album, you definitely hear a mixture of styles going on here, some experimentation, but still, at the end of the day, still feels like Faith No More, but also feels darker too. At least its overall sound, vibe, however you want to put it, again, kind of feels darker than some of their other albums. But I do dig the singles on here, of course, like Evidence, which I think is probably one of the band's best songs. I really like Evidence. Digging the Graves, I think, is another pretty good single from them. You move towards some of the lesser known songs. I really like Star AD, that's another one of my favorites. Ugly in the Morning, I think, is another really good deep cut off the album. Just a Man, I think, is one of the band's best album closers. And I think the album starts off in a fairly strong note with those first two songs, Get Out and Ricochet. Get Out being a fairly more upbeat, rockin' song. I really like that one too. And then the title track is another song that I think is maybe one of my favorites on here too. But yeah, all around, really good stuff. You have your more melodic moments like Take This Bottle and The Last to Know, but you also have your heavier moments like Cuckoo for Kaka and Ugly in the Morning, and both sides, both the melodic and the heavier side, are both great on the album. And yeah, all around, really good stuff. And then we're moving to the album where this might be the album where people might disagree with me, saying that Faith No More had a great 90s album run, because album of the year, I mean, it doesn't get as much love as Real Thing or Angel Dust or maybe even King for a Day, but I personally really dig this album, actually. I mean, I wouldn't rank it as like one of their best. It'd maybe be more towards the middle or maybe towards the bottom half, but I still think this album is still, at the end of the day, great. I mean, if I remember correctly, some of the band members were not too big on this album, specifically Mike Patton. If I remember correctly, I'm going based on things that I've heard or read, but either way, I do think this album is great. You do have some really good songs on here, like Collision, which is maybe one of their heaviest songs. I also like Strip Search, which shows off the band's more melodic side, probably one of my favorite singles from them. Last Cup of Sorrow is also really good, another highlight off the album. I dig the guitar work in Ashes to Ashes. Mouth to Mouth, I think, is one of my favorite deep cuts on the album. You move towards the second half, which is maybe not as strong, but still I think you get some pretty solid stuff in the second half, like Got That Feeling and Paths of Glory. But yeah, all around, another great album from Faith No More. I mean, I can see some people maybe disagreeing with me on that, so maybe an unpopular opinion for me, but either way, I personally dig Album of the Year. But let's go ahead and move on to the final band for this video. We got Korn, which is still, years later, one of my personal favorite bands, and they're, of course, also one of the first bands I ever got into. But, of course, starting off the 90s, they got a self-titled debut, definitely a legendary album in the world of nu metal, and many people point to this album as the album that started it all for the genre, and for good reason. I mean, so many Korn classics on here, like Blind, Clown, and Chutes and Ladders. But you also get some really good deep cuts or B-sides. I mean, Helmet in the Bush has always been one of my personal favorites on the album. I really like that song a lot. Divine's also really good. Then you also have the album closer, Daddy, which is probably hands down one of the most depressing or one of the most sad songs out there in the world of rock and metal. I mean, not a song that I seek out very often, and of course for understandable reasons. I mean, if you've heard this song, then you should definitely understand, but still, at the end of the day, still a solid way to close off the album, still a solid song, I'd say. But yeah, still one of the best albums in the world of nu metal, and also, of course, one of Korn's best. But moving to their sophomore album, we got Life is Peachy, which I think is also really good. I do like Chino and Wicked, which, of course, an Ice Cube cover. But you also have Adidas, which is, of course, the big song on here, and also one of the big highlights on the album, I'd say. But I think this album, also like with the debut, also has some really good deep cuts like Swallow and Mr. Rogers. But yeah, No Place to Hide is probably one of my favorite Korn songs too. And you also have Twist, which is one of their more iconic songs, especially because of Jonathan Davis's vocal performance in that song, especially. But yeah, really good stuff. Can't go wrong with Life is Peachy. But moving to the next album, we got Follow the Leader. Absolutely love this album. I mean, definitely, I pretty much grew up with this album, and really, I listened to their 90s output a lot when I was younger, and of course, some of their other albums too that they would release later, but I'll always have a soft spot for these first four albums especially too. But I mean, you also have some of the biggest songs on here like Freak on a Leash and Got the Life, which I think still hold up, and for me, those songs still never get old. You also have It's On, which is one of the band's best album openers in my opinion. And I actually do like the features on here. I mean, not everyone's a fan of Fred Durst, definitely a fairly divisive figure in the world of rock and metal or even nu metal itself. But I am a Limp Bizkit fan, guilty, and All in the Family, you can maybe say probably hasn't aged all that well, but I can still have a little bit of fun with that song. But I do like the Ice Cube feature on Children of the Corn. Again, might feel maybe a little bit dated, but still, I do kind of like that song. And then Dead Bodies Everywhere, I think, is one of my favorites when it comes to the more lesser-known songs on the album. I'd say the same thing for My Gift to You, which, if I remember correctly, is a song that Jonathan Davis wrote for his wife at the time. But yeah, My Gift to You, definitely a great song. And I do like that song they did with Cheech and Chong, Earache My Eye, which is a hidden track. But yeah, all around, another really great album. And then in the 90s, Off Strong with Issues, which is definitely another one of my favorites from the band. Absolutely love Issues. I mean, you have some of my favorite songs from the band on here, like Falling Away From Me, which is one of their biggest singles. And another one of my favorites from the band is probably Trash. I also love Make Me Bad. That's probably one of the band's best singles in my opinion. But I think this album, I mean, has some really good deep cuts like Wake Up and No Way and Counting. Counting, I think, is one of their most underrated songs, especially when it comes to their more 90s, or when it comes to their 90s output. Hey Daddy, I think, is also really good and kind of overlooked a little bit. Somebody Someone's also pretty good. I probably like the other singles on the album more, but I do still think Somebody Someone is still another really good song on the album. But yeah, I still love this album to this day. Another album that I pretty much grew up with and still love all these years later. But yeah, love Issues. Definitely, again, a strong way to close off the 90s for the band. But yeah, those are 5 bands that to me had a great 90s album run. Let me know if you can think of more bands in the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts on the bands that I chose here for this video. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know some of your favorite or least favorite albums from these bands that I talked about here, and all the good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment and a like, subscribe. Have a nice day, and take care.